But you've got this new book, Never Play It Safe, which in thinking about it, I mean, it's great. I love it. It's a book about creativity, but it's really a book about life, and a sort of relationship or a dynamic in which we all approach our lives. And I found it to be extremely incisive and also helpful. And also, I think, a product of like a very, difficult journey that you've been on.
Yeah.
That really boils down to your experience with this baby that you had, Creative Live.
Yeah. There's a few babies in there.
Yeah.
But the book is called Never Play It Safe for a reason. And I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not talking about seatbelts and sunscreen. I'm not talking about physical safety, emotional safety. All those things are really important. The kind of not playing it safe that I'm talking about is that all of the best stuff in life is on the other side of our comfort zone. And so my hope is that this is a bit of a training manual that will help us get there, because that's not the experiences, the inputs that we get from our friends, our loved ones, our culture, and the organ between our ears. It's not there telling us to take risks, and that all the best stuff is on the other side of our fear. Quite the opposite. So my goal was this to be a little bit of a manual, and it trots out not just, my own relationship with risk and fear, but, having had a podcast that's had more than 1,000 guests, and just having gone through a lot of creative invention and reinvention myself, I've learned a lot about that process. And so I'm trying to share it transparently. And I shared before we started recording, I might as well just spill the beans here, that I worked on this book for 18 months, 5 months in active research and 13 months of writing. And then I threw it all in the trash 8 weeks before my deadline to write the book that you're holding. And
that's so crazy.
And I did it for a reason. And because that's the book that I was supposed to write.
I presume that the earlier version of the book was
very tidy.
Was one that played it safe.
It made everything look great. To quote Brene Brown, it had a lot of gold-plated grit, where you tell just a little gritty story, but you get right back to how shiny and magical everything is, and how shiny and magical you are, and that's just not real. And so indeed it was the process. And that's where the title actually came from, was that process of throwing it all away. And yet now I can't even think of not having had it been that way.
Yeah. So what was the impetus to write this now final version of the book? Because I'm thinking about how it relates to this, adventure that you've been on with Creative Live. It feels very much born out of that struggle.
Yeah.
Not only, the kind of, professional challenges that it presented, but how it kind of brought you to your knees and made you look inward and really reflect on, like, who am I and what am I doing, and how do I want to be spending my time, and why was I doing this, and what happened?
Yeah. Well, two things. I'll try and keep the audience in mind when I say this, and my own story. So the story that you talked about with it, essentially Creative Live is one of the characters in there. And that is if people are new to that, it's an online learning platform that I started 15 plus years ago. And it was the first one of its type. It was the first live streaming. We built live streaming technology from the ground up. And we had many folks who were the best in the world on the platform. We raised, $60 million, had tens of millions of users, made hundreds of millions in revenue. And at some point along the journey, having been the chairman and like charging, this is where we're going, we're taking the hill, and had a lot of the the Silicon Valley universe, like driving the thing. At some point, they were going to drive it off a cliff, and I had to come back and capture it. And essentially, the way I think about it is catch the ball right before it hit the ground, and step into a role as the CEO running a venture-backed company. And I'm a lifelong artist and not necessarily suited for that. So I had to basically betray myself in a way in order to make that happen. And on the hindsight, on the back end of looking backwards, now that company, we grew it again, made it profitable, sold it to a publicly traded company. I did some time as a publicly traded company executive, dangerous. And so there's a reflection on that. But to me, that was a central character in the book. And yet, when I looked back, all of the best things in my life were when I took these big risks. And ironically, even though that was a massive risk, as are so many other chapters that I talk about in that book, that's what made me grow. I wouldn't have changed it. And yet there were so many aspects of that were tiny betrayals, because I ignored who I was to go do this thing because I thought it was going to be well received and look good and was the next career step.